Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about living with ADHD as an adult and its effect on relationships, what is ethical non-monogamy and how our guest makes it work for him, and the different types of relationships and creating a relationship that works for you. But before we jump into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
I had a couple of things that really fueled me up last week.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we had a night out socializing on a school night, which we haven't done in ages.
No, have we?
And that felt like a true marker of returning to somewhat normal post-pandemic life.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was really amazing. But that was actually off of the back of an incredible day that I had work-wise. I just had a really great win with a client. And yeah, it was just a moment of reflection where I really knew that I'd made a really good contribution to helping solve a client's problem.
That sounds really amazing.
Yeah. And the other one was that I got my first surfboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, my surf school was having a garage sale, an ex-rental sale. So I dragged Nath down there with me and picked something out, gave it a test drive.
Gave it a little try.
And then I brought it home with me.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that it just felt like a cool milestone for what is kind of like a new hobby. I've invested in some coaching and lessons, wetsuit, and now the board. So I'm getting pretty confident that I'm going to be able to take myself out there on my own.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. What about you, Nath? What fueled you up this past week?
So you obviously mentioned that we went out on a school night, but that was actually on the back of my first RDO. So I've just moved to a new roster of 9-day fortnights, and so get a long weekend every second weekend. So that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's in beta, isn't it? You're going to fall in love with this.
I am going to fall in love with it, I think. So having that extra long weekend felt really, really good, and I'm just looking forward to having that every second weekend too. Yeah, in exchange for slightly longer days. But also on the weekend, I got called up to play for our first grade footy team. So I normally play in the reserves grade, but we're a few players short this week, so I got the call up to play with the big boys. So that was a bit of fun. We got smashed, but yeah, it was just nice to have a run around with the first grades.
Yeah, stretch you a little bit past your current capability.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it was really nice to be invited. But now, here's this week's guest.
Today we've got Shane joining us. Shane is a certified life and relationship coach who specializes in ADHD and ethical non-monogamy. He has hosted and been a guest on various podcasts speaking on diverse subjects such as ADHD, education reform, parenting, and ethical non-monogamy. As the founder of Creating Order from Chaos, he helps others to discover their personal truths. He uses many years in various leadership roles to help people dealing with chaotic lives to create order. Welcome to the show, Shane.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey, so you've joined us on the Date Forever podcast where we chat about the relationship with ourselves and the relationship with our person and dating forever. So tell us, what's your relationship status?
I am married to literally the most amazing woman in the world for me.
Yeah, and how long have you been married?
We actually just celebrated our 8th anniversary, legally speaking, yesterday.
Very cool. So tell us a little bit about that relationship. Tell us about how you met and how you've ended up here.
So I had been going through a lot of really big issues in my life back in 2012. I had just gotten laid off from a job that I had been doing essentially travel work where I was going from company to company, essentially going in and restructuring their inventory systems and a whole bunch of other nerdy stuff like that. And I was making quite a bit of money, and I didn't have any bills because I didn't have an apartment or anything along those lines. So they lost a major contract, and so whenever they did that, they kind of just said, "Hey, where do you want to go? You're kind of one of the free floaters." And I was like, "Well, I'm in North Carolina. I might as well stay here." You know what I mean? And so I stayed here, and I just kind of started bouncing around. I had quite a bit of a nest egg built up. I have been fairly responsible with my money, and like I started wanting to start dating, and so of course I get on the websites, OkCupid, Plenty of Fish, and kind of start throwing my name out there, trying to see if anybody's interested. Getting turned down a lot, and I came across this woman's profile, and she just seemed, I don't know, there was just this thing, right? As soon as I saw it, and I messaged her, and waited a couple of days, and okay, well, yeah, all right. And then I was on Plenty of Fish, and I saw her again, and I said, okay, look, I don't believe in coincidences. There has to be a thing here. And so I messaged her again, and then apparently that was what it was. And then she goes, a few days later, we started talking, and as we're talking, she goes, you messaged me on OkCupid, didn't you? And I was like, yeah, sure did. I'm glad I made a impression. She goes, no, I deleted it. Okay, that's cool. And of course, in my heart, I was just kind of like, I don't know where this is going to go. But it's so strange. Like 9 days later, we met in real life. And, we were about a couple of hours apart, and she drove up on a weeknight. We met and got coffee. And the next thing I know, we're back at the house, and we're just hanging out and having these really in-depth conversations. And it's like, next thing, I'm like, and I looked at my watch, and I totally wasn't doing that guy thing where I was like, oh, yeah, well, it's like midnight. You should totally stay. I wasn't doing that intentionally, but that's what wound up happening. It was like midnight, and I was like, okay, man, you've got school in the morning. She's a special needs teacher. Like, she's amazing as far as that's concerned. But she goes, you know what? Hey, can I just sleep here? And I was just like, oh, this is it, right? And so what's funny is we wound up going to bed together and, sleeping together, but we didn't actually have sex or anything. We just kind of talked until like 2 a.m. And like from then on, it was just, we were with each other as much as we possibly could. She would come up from where she was at. She'd spend the night. I'd go down there, stay at her apartment, and then we just never left each other's side. We've been together ever since.
Yeah, amazing.
That's really beautiful. And I know that some of those nights where you do stay up in bed and just chat for hours and hours and hours have been really great in our relationship too.
Yeah. And it's really crazy because I have ADHD, and so in my past lives, as far as relationships are concerned, I was kind of a serial monogamist. I jumped from relationship to relationship to relationship after about, I got to a point where I could kind of calculate it. It was like 4 to 6 months, and I was usually done with a person. And because, you get tired of the same stuff, you know what I mean? When you have ADHD, you hyper-focus on something super intensely, and that includes your relationship. So you feel really hard, and there's this amazing energy that you give off, this super intense energy. And for some people, it's really great. Like when you're pushing that kind of energy into another person's life and giving them that much attention and giving them that kind of sex and giving them that kind of just emotional depth, it's really great. However, after a little while, when you have ADHD, that kind of starts dying off. And if the relationship doesn't have really good communication or a space where the person with ADHD feels safe enough to communicate the things that they're dealing with, then the relationship starts, failing, because the other person who's gotten used to this energy that you've been giving off, this attention that you've been giving them, all of a sudden starts to wonder what happened, right? And if there's no communication happening, then they start questioning, like, is this just that phase and you're done now? Are you cheating on me already? And a lot of big insecurities kind of start popping up. And again, without a good communication, then that kind of dies off. But the thing with my wife was, she's a special needs teacher, and she totally understood. And she called me like within a few months. She goes, I think you have ADHD. And I wasn't diagnosed at the time.
Yeah, okay.
And she's like, you should really get that checked out. But she had created this environment for me where I knew I could talk to her about anything I was dealing with. I could communicate with her. I didn't have to worry about lying about how I was really feeling. I didn't have to deal with the insecurities that I dealt with other people, because I grew up in an abused childhood, right? And I was in a marriage with an abusive ex-wife. And so that had taught me that I had to kind of wear these masks. And having these masks on meant that I couldn't show who I really was. And she was the first woman I was able to be with that I could just be who I actually authentically was. And she totally was cool with it. And I was like, oh no, what kind of bodies do you have buried somewhere? Good to be true. But we just kept going, and I have never gotten tired of being with her. I've never gotten bored with her. I've never had these issues that I've had with other relationships happen.
So, Shane, I would love to know. So, I know that most of our listeners have probably heard that term ADHD before. They might know someone, they might be neurodivergent themselves. But I would love to know from your perspective, as someone who's been diagnosed late in life, what is ADHD and what is the experience of living with ADHD like?
So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That's the clinical term for it, and that's what everybody knows it as. But the thing is it's a different type of neurotype. Your brain is different. You're wired differently. You think differently. Your chemicals are different. Your genetics have different coding. And it causes a lot of issues with hyper-focusing on certain things, not being able to maintain attention on things for a long period of time, starting projects, a number of projects, and then not really following through all of them, having a hard time with due dates and procrastination. If it's not new, interesting, challenging, urgent, I call it the NICU score. If it's not any of these, it just kind of really falls off to the wayside, and the next shiny is in your face, and so you kind of bounce. There's two types of ADHD that we know of. It's hyperactive and then inattentive, and then of course there's a combined. I actually have both. I am both hyperactive and inattentive, so I both get really excited about things and forget about them all the time. So which also makes relationships really hard for me, because I get really intense into a relationship, even friendships and family members and things like that. And then after a while, once I've gotten really comfortable with them, then I'm not as responsive as I should be. I don't communicate as well as I should, because out of sight, out of mind. And so long distance relationships are really difficult, things of that nature. And so as far as that's actually kind of where ethical non-monogamy came to me, because I learned about it while listening to Dan Savage's Savage Lovecast. And ironically, I was in the car on the way to meet my soon-to-be wife's parents up in Ohio, and we were driving, and it comes on, we're listening to it, and as we're listening to it, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense for me. And she's like, really? And so we actually had a good 2-3 hour conversation about it, and what would it mean for us and stuff like that. But back to the ADHD thing. Sorry, tangent.
Well, no, we're gonna circle back to that, because I've got some questions.
We'll circle back to that one. But when you have ADHD and you have to deal with your relationships, you have to have this environment where you can trust the people that you're with, and they need to be able to know that what you're dealing with, and so you have to really advocate for yourself. And that's kind of actually what I do as an ADHD life coach, is I help people kind of navigate through the various aspects of ADHD. And that can include the relationships, that can include your career and your job goals, and that can just be your life, where you're trying to make sure that you're not putting off your bills, and you're not spending money impulsively, and you're not, and you have somebody who can kind of be in your corner, give you a safe space to go talk to, along with dealing with a psychiatrist for medication, and along with working with a therapist for trauma related, feelings related things. Now you can talk to the coach about stuff like that. I don't mind. I'm a good ear. I love to listen to people, and I'm that kind of guy who just has a shit ton of life experience, and so I love to give advice. And so, that's kind of what I do for people. I kind of help them find their paths. What kind of tools do they need? What kind of environment do they need? How do they need to communicate with the people around them to let them understand what type of ADHD they have, and what that means for them, what their strengths are, what their limitations are. And so that's kind of what I do for people.
So before we pivot back to this conversation about ethical non-monogamy, I would love to know, like, if someone is in a relationship with someone who they has ADHD or suspect they might have ADHD and needs to go and explore that with a professional, what are some of the handful of things that you can recommend to help strengthen that relationship? What are some of the tips, tools, tricks that you've picked up?
It's actually the same thing that you need for a relationship to start with, right? You when you have a relationship and you're working with somebody to develop the style of things, you need to be able to communicate effectively together. And both of you need to also start immediately working on trust and communicating and trust and being able to be completely honest with each other, not just about the day-to-day stuff, but if this person is a person that you really think you're going to be strongly with, even if it's going to be a short-term relationship or a mid-term relationship, you need to be able to be with somebody who you can be completely honest with. Because if you don't feel safe with that person now at the very beginning, that's not something that you can develop over a long period of time. You need to understand that, like, when we have trauma and when we have a lot of issues in our past in relationships and stuff like that, we have that gut feeling. And when we don't feel safe with the person that we're with, we're likely not going to ever be safe with them. And so that's those red flags that I tell people, like, look, maybe you're just in a relationship for a couple of weeks or a one night stand or, a couple of months or 2 years, enjoy the time that you're with each other, right? Don't worry so much about how long the relationship is going to last. Because our society says, okay, well, one of you needs to die for this to be a successful relationship. And that's unfair because, like, everybody changes. And so, like, who you are at age 22 is drastically different to who you are when you're 30. And that's why we see divorce rates at about 86% for people who get married at age 20 to 22 within 8 years. So, again, start with the honesty, trust, and communication. Give them that environment and that safety so that they can communicate with you when they're starting to deal with stuff, even if they don't know that they have ADHD, even if they don't know that they have depression or bipolar disorder or any kind of mental health or physical health issues. You need to give them the space and opportunity to be able to know that you will always have their back and that you're safe enough to be with them. And then when you want to find out more about it, there's things like Attitude Magazine online. You can go there, and there's different resources for both spouses and people with ADHD. You can get an online test and kind of see where you fall into on the spectrum of ADHD. And you can take those results to a psychiatrist and say, hey, these are what I dealt with online. This is kind of what I go through. And then if you're dealing with the correct kind of psychiatrist, they'll go ahead and get you tested. And you have to really advocate for yourself here, because a lot of psychiatrists up until recently have started really doubting, or like really doubted that adults could have ADHD. Like, they kind of like lumped it into this childhood disorder. But the problem is ADHD is a neurotype, and it's a lifetime thing. You never get better from ADHD. You learn to manage it and you learn to deal with the symptoms and things like that. But over time, you develop a lot of different comorbidities that come along with it. So your depression, your anxiety, your bipolar disorder, your rejection sensitivity dysphoria, imposter syndrome, these all come along with ADHD when you have a lot of trauma that's happening to you growing up, especially in the American South, where mental health is kind of a sideline thing, especially as a kid, So you got to understand where your partner is coming from and give them the space to be able to be who they authentically are, so they can take that mask off that we develop as young children so that we can seem normal. And once that happens, once you've given them that space, it's then learning what their strengths are, right? Learning what their limitations are, and then working together to figure out the tool set that those people need to be able to function within what your expectations are. And your expectations can't be what your expectations for your average Joe is. Your expectations have to be what this person can actually do. Because our biggest problem with our society is we have this idea that there's a normal, that there's like this, like everybody is supposed to fit into this box that we can measure. And that's not a real thing. And it took me 36 years to learn this. Normal is an illusion. It's a social construct and it doesn't exist. So you have to create your expectations based on the actual person that you're with and what they're capable of and what their limitations force them into.
Yeah, I really like that even just the idea of like the thing that often messes us up is that it doesn't meet our expectations or what we've decided it should be. It doesn't reflect the way that we think it should be, so therefore we're disappointed. Whereas were those expectations even attainable or achievable for that person or for that relationship or for yourself? So I think that gap is often where that suffering comes from. So Shane, I think it's pretty cool that you met somebody who was like, hey, I think you should explore this. And then you've been able to unlock all of this learning about yourself and your the way that your brain works. I think that's really amazing. But I would love to go back to your wife's name is Darcy. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So take us back. So you and Darcy are in the car, you're engaged, and you're on your way to go meet her parents. And you've gone, non-monogamy. This sounds interesting. Tell us a little bit about that.
So here's the thing. We weren't engaged yet. I'd already realized this woman was the woman I was going to be with. I knew this at this point. But this is actually 3 months into our relationship.
Oh, wow.
And, right. And so, again, we had already developed this really honest and trusting communication style. So we were able to sit here and go, well, what are the positives? What are the negatives? And this episode of Dan Savage's podcast was really, really strong on the different types of ethical non-monogamy. I don't know if it was planned but it was really well done. And one of these days I'll try to remember what podcast it was. But it really struck me because I had been dealing with all these different types of relationships in my past. And then as me and her are talking about it, she's like, it's really interesting. And I think it'd be something to explore. Let's see where we're at in 2 to 3 years. And so we just kind of tabled it. Right. And then eventually we actually did get married the next year, both like legally speaking, because we got married on April Fool's Day because she needed insurance. And, I was working at a really good job. And then we had our official marriage in September and her dad was able to officiate it because we were already legally married. So it was super awesome. It was great. Yeah. And we had her dream wedding. It was rainbows everywhere, tie-dye everywhere. It was just a fantastic wedding. But during this conversation, we just kind of really said, well, we'll just explore it and see what happens. And then, a couple of years later, I had joined a couple of different polyamory groups on Facebook and had been kind of just tracking it. And then, of course, I had one of these moments where I said, I'm going to research everything there is to know about ethical non-monogamy and figure out what there is about it. And so I hyper-focused on it for about 8 months, and it's been ongoing for 10 years now.
Yeah. So tell us, for someone who has maybe never heard that term before, what is ethical non-monogamy?
Ethical non-monogamy is a hard word to say all at the same time. No, it's kind of an umbrella term for any kind of relationship that falls out of the duo monogamous relationship that we hear about in our normal society. There's things such as polyamory, where it's like multiple meaningful relationships. There's swinging. There's don't ask, don't tell. There's open relationships. There's polyfidelity relationships, relationship anarchy. All of these kind of fall under this umbrella. And the main thing about ethical non-monogamy is everybody involved knows about it. And there's no dishonesty about it. There's communication happening. There's consent. Enthusiastic consent is extremely important. And it's just a matter of making sure that everybody around is aware. Even in don't ask, don't tell relationships where you just don't talk about it with the other person, you still know that whenever they go to this business conference, they're probably going to get a boyfriend, or they go to this, couples retreat, they're probably going to join in with like the swingers and things of that nature. They just don't talk about it outside of that.
So I guess it's that openness, adhering to the rules that you've got within your relationship that makes it the ethical part, yeah?
Right. You have to really have the boundaries, and they have to be communicated effectively amongst everybody involved. it's a little fuzzy when you have like a don't ask, don't tell kind of relationship. But the boundaries are essentially, I don't want to know about it. Don't, like, and then the other rules are like, don't get somebody pregnant, don't have a baby, like communicate with me if there's an issue, like somebody stalking you or something, something along those lines. Like, you want to make sure those lines of communication and boundaries are set. For some people, it is, I'd like you not to date anybody who's not male, or I'd like you to date anybody who's not female, so you have to discuss those, but everybody has to be on board with those. And, it can't be, I'm going to put this rule on you and you're not allowed to do this thing, even though that person really wants to do that thing. It's not fair. You have to give, there has to be that,
difference between control, boundary, rule, agreement. Yeah. Collaboration here.
Right. You have to find the middle ground that everybody is comfortable with. And then you have to communicate. You need to check in with each other. You need to say, hey, has anything changed? Are you feeling a certain way about things? Because if you're not doing that, those insecurities and jealousies and things that we naturally deal with kind of start creeping in. And if you're not checking in with somebody, all of a sudden they blow up at you and oh, you slept with 47 women this month and I couldn't get anybody this month, And it's and then everybody's that actually hasn't happened to me yet. No, but
47 was a very specific number.
I don't know why, but so you have to make sure that you're checking in with each other, because again, people change, and walking into a situation where you accidentally hear, your spouse doing something with somebody else, you knew that there was probably somebody going to be home, so they'd communicate, hey, Bob's going to come by today, so just to let you know. And so as long as you're following those boundaries and as long as you're checking in and communicating, that's kind of how it works, and but you can't go into ethical non-monogamy with a bad relationship. Right? You have to have that. You already have to have that strong communication style. You have to already have that space for honesty and trust already embedded in your relationship. Because if you go into ethical non-monogamy and you already have a lot of issues with your relationship, then they're just going to get worse and worse and worse.
We know a few couples who have been not in a great place in their marriage or in their core relationship, and then they've thrown the Hail Mary of well, let's just open it up. Let's open up our relationship, or let's start seeing other people, and we'll try. And I've not yet seen someone in a fractured relationship succeed or develop a thriving relationship in their core relationship and in a non-monogamous relationship outside of their core relationship. So I want to echo what you said, the core relationship has to be strong. So Shane, I would love to know, you were in your marriage, how did the two of you introduce this? And had Darcy had any experience with this before this conversation came up?
Actually, no. My wife's family is essentially the most vanilla family I've ever seen. They literally are the epitome of Midwestern, white family. Literally 2.5 kids, and white parents, the whole 9 yards. And, she's a special needs teacher. And so, she was fairly casual. She didn't really have any jarring issues with any relationships, no real trauma or anything like that. But she was just open to the idea, right? She'd been in various relationships. This just seemed like a fun, different idea. And so, as we kind of got into it, we started exploring things with another woman. We did the fairly common practice of trying to find a unicorn, a woman who both she and I could be with and kind of enjoy time with and stuff like that. I have a hard time with the unicorn hunting because it often causes a lot of issues for the person that's been hunted, because it's very hard to find a person who likes both of you. And that's a very unrealistic expectation to ask somebody, because I'm not the same as my wife and she's not the same as me, and so somebody might like in her, they won't like in me. And so there's a lot of toxicity that comes in there, and there's a lot of predators out there who kind of try to force you into this, you have to be with both of us. And so
We've had another couple who are practicing ethical non-monogamy, and one of the things that they suggested as like a toe in the water was like, if you're thinking like, oh, we're going to find a woman to bring home to our relationship and we're going to share, and like, just go get a sex worker. Like, there is someone who is literally a professional who can work with your boundaries and ease you into this experience. Like, don't go out into the world and subject another human being who has emotions, feelings, like their own stuff going on, into your shit.
Yeah, like legitimately, and that's a great advice. The advice that I give people is just try to date separately. Find people who you click with, and then, if you're trying to build like a relationship, like a V or a triad or a throuple or a quad or something along those lines, you need to like kind of just introduce everybody into it. For definition's sake, a V is like where there's one person and two people connected to it. Throuple is, of course, three people all involved. A quad is four people all involved. And what I kind of suggest to people is like, meet people who you're both interested in and who have shown interest in you, and then just let the relationship form organically. And if there is a connection, cool, explore it. And if there's not, don't put a lot of pressure on each other to force it, because again, forcing the issue is really negative and it hurts people and it can cause a lot of pain.
So how did you and Darcy do it?
We actually broke lucky and we found a woman who's interested in both of us. And we kind of just like popped the cherry with her, and then, that was a short-term thing. We all kind of agreed that it was going to be a short-term thing, just to have fun with each other. We liked each other. It was fun to hang out with them, but the end game wasn't really there. But then a few weeks later, my wife met this guy, and they started talking, and she really enjoyed spending time with him. And he seemed like a really cool guy. I was kind of a hands-off guy because I deal with insecurity and jealousy really bad. So I was just kind of like, hey, do whatever you want with them, and cool. But then we decided to have him and his wife come over. We were kind of just kicking it, and his wife was beautiful. Like, she was amazing looking. She was funny. She was like liked a lot of the same things I enjoyed, like LARPing and just different aspects of Renaissance fairs, and like we just all hit it off. And then the next thing we know, like we all four were in a relationship with each other. Now he and I were, I'm fairly straight. He's very straight, but he and I just really were just really good friends almost off the bat. And it was really fun. And we actually wound up moving in together, and we lived in a 3,500 square foot house with all of us making roughly $45,000 to $80,000 a year, and so we were super flush.
Yeah.
Look,
unexpected benefit.
Unexpected benefit. Like, here we are. We're in this amazing house in a really nice part of town with a really cool people. We met a bunch of friends through them. We were building up this really nice community. We all kind of started building this polycule, which is kind of like where there's just different relationships kind of branching off into other things. And so my wife started dating another guy, and and he became one of my best friends. And then I started dating a few other people just to kind of have little flings here and there. And then her boyfriend was dating 2 or 3 other women, and so we just kind of
need a whiteboard to keep track of it all.
Right.
Yeah.
And one time I built an entire Excel spreadsheet, and I'm like, okay, all right. So and again, so if you think of a molecule where you've got the central structure and then all the things that branch off of it, that's kind of what we built. And so polycule's not my word; it's somewhere on the internet, but. It just really worked for us, and we had a lot of fun, and we were, Darcy was able to explore a lot of kinks that she was interested in. I'm fairly vanilla, and my sex drive is really weird. Damn near asexual sometimes. Again, when you have ADHD, you're like, ooh, everything's shiny, and then after a while, so that's kind of like what my sex life is. It's 6 months of amazing, and then it's just so.
It's cool that you found something that works for you. What I would love to know is, how did you, if you did, introduce this concept to your family. You said that Darcy's family is super vanilla, very to mum and dad, 2.5 kids. Like this, I imagine that this concept would have blown their mind, or was it a big secret?
That's not a thing we talk to them about at all. So there's multiple reasons why it's an issue. My wife, she's a teacher. And so in the South, in the Southern United States, there's a lot of teachers that whenever they sign their contract, there's an indecency clause. And part of that indecency clause is like, if you are caught having a big, huge affair and it makes a lot of waves and stuff like that, causes dramas, and you can lose your job, right? And so there's a really bad stigma about ethical non-monogamy, again, especially in the American South, where that's not the way God intended you to be, men and women. It completely ignores the divorce rate. It completely ignores the amount of affairs that are out there and how much cheating happens, and all of that's just hypocritical bullshit. So we just we don't really talk about it. Like a bunch of our friends obviously know, because
they are out, we
banged them, so
really good friends.
Yeah, right. It's like really great friends. But it just works, but we just don't talk about it. I don't really talk about it. I didn't really discuss it with my family. I don't really have a lot of family that I talk to anymore anyways. So, it's just, we just don't really talk about it a whole lot. We don't bring it up. It's and like, if somebody asked us about it, we wouldn't lie about it, but at the same time, we're not going to go out there and
not putting up a billboard.
Yeah.
Right.
So Shane, how has seeing other people in your relationships affected that core relationship?
Strengthened it for the most part, because we maintain this communication style, we maintain the trust, we maintain the honesty, and her being with other people and still being with me really helped me with my rejection sensitivity. Like she didn't reject me, right? She didn't go off and find somebody better than me. She stayed with me. And so like there's this sense of gratitude that you kind of start developing when somebody affects you that way in your life. Like they've done things with other people, they've met people who you've respected and have friendships with, and they still came back to you, and that makes there's a certain uniqueness about yourself that the person kind of honors with they're willing to come back to you. Like you didn't fuck up that bad, right?
they're always choosing you and always choosing to come back.
Yeah, I know that this is like a really challenging concept for a lot of people, and they're like, whoa, I would be so crazy jealous, and I can't believe that you let them do that, or I would never let my partner do that, and all of that kind of, I guess, narrative. And it comes back to what you said about our idea of what we think is normal, what we think is safe, what we think the tribe will continue to accept us if we behave in this certain way, and if our relationship looks a certain way, sounds a certain way. But, Nathan and I started the Date Forever podcast like over 2 years ago now. We've had hundreds of conversations with couples and experts in their various fields. And one of the things that shows up time and time again is that there is no one way. There are some core principles for sure, but what looks like a healthy, happy, thriving relationship for me and Nath is not going to be a copy paste for somebody else. And so much of this show is about exploring that and going, what would thriving look like for you? And what would an intentional, designed relationship look like for you? And what would add fuel to your tank and what would deplete it? And how can you create opportunities where you can add more fuel and have less of the activities that are really draining? And for some people, being with one person day in, day out, year in, year out is draining. So I thank you so much for sharing your story, your evolution, how you kind of make it work. But what I would love to know to kind of round this out is like, what are the couple of things that you and Darcy do to keep your relationship fueled up and in that healthy, happy, thriving space?
We have little rituals, right? So we learned early on about the five love languages, and we both speak each other's fluently. Hers.
Well done.
Right. Hers is touch and acts of kindness. Mine is words of affirmation and touch. And one of our major rituals is like literally every day for the past going on 11 years, I rub her feet. Like, that's our thing. Like, and it's not, there's not a kink to it or anything like that. She works really hard. She's a teacher. And like one day she just kind of popped her feet in my lap, and, you know, I just started rubbing her feet. And then like, that's kind of what our thing is. We watch the TV shows that we love together. I rub her feet. She gets to relax, you know, and I'm a stay-at-home dad, and I really work hard. I make sure that, you know, she doesn't have to do a whole lot when she comes home. She's able to just kick up her feet and relax, play with the kids. She may have to cook every now and then just because I needed like an hour to get my brain off the twins. So we just really complement each other, and so she's always made me feel safe, and I've always like been there for her, and I've always been honest with her, and she's never had a reason to doubt me. And so it's really hard to put it into like really strong terms now. Like we refuel we make sure that we spend time with each other without the kids around. We, you know, may not be able to get date night, but when the kids go down, like we kind of have our own
foot rub ritual.
Yeah.
Right. You know, but not just foot rub ritual, but there's also just the kind of laying in bed and talking to each other and just kind of checking in. We check in with each other all the time. Like, hey, how are you feeling? What's been going on? Am I doing everything okay? This kind of helps me because, again, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I still have these thoughts and, you know, the fears of failing and things of that nature. And so it makes me feel better for when she tells me that, you know, she's feeling great, she's feeling happy, you know, that kind of like balances out the imposter syndrome sometimes that, you know, I'm not good enough for this woman because she's absolutely amazing. She's a special needs teacher. She has all these amazing qualities. She's way out of my zone as far as how beautiful she is. It's like that, you know, being able to talk to each other and just like knowing that when she says these things, she means them and she's not just blowing smoke up my ass. It's really great, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, yeah. Your relationship sounds beautiful. So thank you so much for letting us have a peek behind the curtains and how you make it work and how you keep it fueled up. Shane, to say thank you, we have provided a month of early childhood education to a classroom in Kenya. We've been able to do this via our partnership with Buy One, Give One. So thank you so much for being here to share your story, and thank you so much for making that possible.
Definitely. I really appreciate coming on. This is a fun conversation. I don't get to talk about ethical non-monogamy enough.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important conversation to have because not all relationships look the same, and there are so many ways that you can create something together that is really meaningful and fulfilling for you. So thank you for showing us another way.
Yeah, definitely.
So Shane, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about ADHD or ethical non-monogamy, how should they do that?
They can find me online at www.creatingorderfromchaos.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Creating Order from Chaos Coaching. I've had a bunch of clients hitting me up, and primarily with ADHD, but then there's been some people like, what is ethical non-monogamy and what does that mean for me? And, you know, that's where you can find me, and I'm always open for free advice. I'm always available to chat and have conversations about things.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Shane, and thank you for being so generous.
I definitely appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.